I'm really wanted to give this platform. I gave this platform in Ghana while I was in Ghana to Brooklyn, uh, which was very meaningful to me because I had been dreaming about this platform for a long time, uh, especially during the pandemic and a little bit before, where I really started rereading Morrison's novels or reading them for the first time, and kind of almost like I would say it was almost like it became a, an event each time. Like there's a story to why I read each particular novel at whatever point. But the sort of cause that gave me the inspiration to to really tackle it and not just think about it was the fact that you know there was a gubernatorial election in Virginia, and beloved was referenced and sort of uh, I would say the word is kind of implied in an attack ad. And we had the banned books platform earlier, and I was hoping Henry would be here, and I saw him. I'm happy he's here, and he gave a really beautiful summation of Beloved. But it was particularly heartbreaking to me because Beloved had become, to me, such a seminal work of Morrison, but also in all the literature I've read. And I would say it's one of those books that I would say is a humanist. Uh, I would say it's in the pantheon of like there's no Bible for humanism, canon canon for humanism, but I would say Beloved. If there were a canon for humanism, I would say Beloved has to be in that canon. And so the fact that this happened, and I don't want to focus on the gubernatorial politics and book banning too much, because I really want to focus on the work and sort of other works that have inspired me by Toni Morrison. But it is the fact that Toni Morrison has shaped me as an ethical culturalist and inspired me to strive to be a better human being. The lessons that I gather from reading Toni Morrison is really this, right? That Toni Morrison shaped my humanism by helping me shape my value of relationship in community. And Toni Morrison forced me to interrogate myself as a man and as an artist. In almost every Toni Morrison novel I've read, I mentioned that I had a story that sort of like aligned with why I read the book and what kind of how I approached it and what I took out from it. And Beloved is in fact I feel like it's the ultimate one. It's the ultimate sort of reminder of one how like impulsive I could be, as well as selfish, but also I think also idealistic. So I was reading Beloved, and before I finished it, I loaned it to an ex-girlfriend of mine. And then I said, you know what? I actually want to give this book to a high school student that I knew who liked reading, and I want to give it to her. So it was before my ex-girlfriend had finished the book while we were dating. And I was like, that was so, looking back, that was so, I don't know, what's the word I'm looking for? Uh, so insensitive, right? But anyway, but it showed like I was thinking, I was trying to do something right, but failing in the process. So it was a perfect, I felt like sort of capsule of that aspect of myself. But when I had really sort of thought about Beloved, was like, okay, maybe I need to like attempt to read it again. It was right before the pandemic, and one of my dear friends was giving was part of a circle that shared aspects of Morrison's writing that resonated with them. And she shared the Big Shug's speech on the clearing. And this is the speech on the clearing, or this is the section that she shared. Love it hard. Love it. Love it hard. Yonder, they do not love your flesh, they despise it. They don't love your eyes, they just as soon pick them out. No more do they love the skin on your back. Yonder they flay it. And oh, my people, they do not love your hands. They only use, tie, bind, chop off, and leave empty. Love your hands. Love them. Raise them up and kiss them. Touch others with them. Pat them together. Stroke them on your face because they don't love that either. You got to love you. And no, they ain't in love with your mouth. Yonder out there, they will see it broken and break it again. What you say out of it, they will not heed. What you scream from it, they do not hear. What you put in it to nourish your body, they will snatch away and give you leavings instead. No, they don't love your mouth. You got to love it. This is flesh I'm talking about. Flesh that needs to be loved. So I want to repeat that last line. This is flesh I'm talking about. Flesh that needs to be loved. I think what attracted me to this passage once I heard it and sort of, and I want to say almost, excuse me, y'all, my allergies are killing me. I would say almost out of context, I would say out of context, but out of the text and sort of in the world, what I sort of immediately struck me about it was it appeared to me this, what I thought, alternative, non-traditional articulation of religion and spirituality. The clearing at this point represented to me a community of people sharing and caring. It's multi-generational and non-dogmatic. Now, does this sound familiar? I say more accurately, could this sound familiar, right? And I think the fact that it focuses on the flesh is something, when I interpret it, when I think of the term flesh in, when I was going to church as a young person, the flesh was a bad thing. The flesh was source of evil. The flesh was source of temptation. The flesh was something to be ashamed of or to try to hide or deny. But here, we're being told to love our flesh, to cherish it, to invest in the ways that it calms and soothes other people. Use it to calm and soothe ourselves. To me, this is such a, and I always feel like I'm saying something controversial when I say this, but it feels like an articulation of humanism that at its very core, I think, is what humanism is about. It's the flesh, aka the material, our being in the world, our ways that we engage in our space with other people, the impact that it has, the responsibility that we have because of that impact, right? It comes down to the flesh, how we are in space and sharing space and with other people. The other reason why this sort of just reverberates within me and resonates so much is because it's also the binding of ideas and approaches of practicing spirituality that feel very African, right? In a very general sense, right? In sort of like in terms of a Putz community, like integrating life and worship, there's no separation. And then in the context, in this sort of present context, carrying that to what it means to be here, where we are, as in the United States, as in this country, but in this place where as a people yearning and learning how to be free constantly, right? That the end of the Civil War doesn't mean that people are free yet, right? The Civil Rights Bill doesn't mean that people are fully realizing their freedom yet, are able to. And so that Beloved captures this other aspect of humanism that I love, the process, that it's a process becoming free and becoming who you are. So I think, but when I reread Beloved, this wasn't actually the part where I say I had the most emotional response to when I came upon it. I saw the words, I started recognizing like, this is the part Miriam was reading from, right? And I felt all happy because I could recognize it. But it was actually towards the end when, and I feel we'll say that like Beloved is important because I won't say it's not a plot driven book because we know the most intense thing that happens in the book. We already told, we already know what is the thing that happened in the book, right? Is that what led to the book's creation, what inspired Toni Morrison to write this book was a historical event of a woman killing her killing and attempting to kill her children instead of being taken back into slavery. This sort of incident happened in the real world, and Toni Morrison builds a world around it to explore sort of these ideas around freedom and justice and forgiveness, grief, right? But this is so we know what happened. So I don't feel as bad giving spoilers, right? But I will say that this part in the novel is near the end, and this is the application of the clearing, right? So the clearing is an idea of how to be in spirituality. It's a demonstration. It's an action, right? I would say this next part demonstrates what that could look like in practice. Some brought what they could and what they believed would work, stuffed in apron pockets, strung around their necks, lying in space between their breasts. Others brought Christian faith as shield and sword. Most brought a little of both. They had no idea what they would do once they got there. They just started out, walking down Bluestone Road and came together at the agreed upon time. The heat kept a few women who promised to go home. Others who believed the story didn't want any part of the confrontation and wouldn't have come no matter what the weather. And there were those like Lady Jones who didn't believe the story and hated the ignorance of those who did. So 30 women made up that company and walked slowly toward. For Seath, it was though the clearing had stood in the doorway. For Seath, it was as though the clearing had stood in the doorway. For Seath, it was as though the clearing had come to her with all its heat and simmering leaves, where the voices of women searched the right combination, the key, the code, the sound that broke the back of words, building voice upon voice until they found it. And when they did, it was a wave of sound wide enough to sound deep water and knocked the pods off chestnut cheese. It broke over sea, and she trembled like the baptized in its watch. So what would happen as we sort of will see with Beloved, right? There's this person, as Toni Morrison takes the story of this woman who does this horrific thing, right? But as a response to the protection of her children from the horrors that she already knows, right? And Beloved is this weaving of memory and present and past and in all rolled up into one. So it constantly flows from the past of and what happened during slavery times to the ways that it connects to something in the present. And so this moment, as we get here, it is in the present, and she has reached the kind of the break point of her struggling to deal with what she believes is the coming back of her child who she killed. And the community has now gotten the word around the community has spread, and they see that there's a problem, and they think they have to respond. How do you respond to something like this, right? Because some people it's spiritual, other people think it's like it's her the result of trauma over all these years of being isolated and not being able to take care of herself, or her daughter who's still in the house with her. And so the idea that they did not agree on what the problem was. They didn't agree about what the solution could be, but they moved together as a community, as a seeking community. And they coalesced all the things they believed might work, and it calmed into this thing. And when she said she trembled like the baptized in its wash. There was no particular religion here that's given credit. There's no particular idea or philosophy or life outlook. But what is happening or happened, right, was the collective caring of community and the willingness to see what emerges from that collective caring, because the problem is great enough to ask for the community's attention and its action. Now, this is where I feel, again, when I say, oh, Toni Morrison talk about humanism, oh, this is like pragmatism. I hear pragmatism here. And when I say that, I think about the edict, truth is what works, right? And that, to my mind, that if truth is what works, that suggests a scientific process, right? Or exploratory process, right? We try this truth, see if it works. We try that truth, see if it works. We try this and then see if it doesn't. And we constantly are kind of building towards that, right? But at the same time of that, like along the way, we've got to understand we've got different also ideas of what things mean. That there are ways that we can say before, right? I was given this idea that justice is when someone is punished for doing something wrong. I would say pragmatism, in terms of, and why I mentioned pragmatism, or why I think it related to a talk on ethical culture, is that we, for our reconciliation with humanism and sort of the binding and merging of ethical culture and humanism, which is why you kind of have that term, ethical humanism, is that we had to say, okay, what parts of humanism resonate with what ethical culture might be or might be becoming? And so pragmatism was part of that big, that group of philosophical things that sort of align with ethical culture, or we believe would inform ethical culture, right? And so this idea that like the truth is what works, and so that's kind of thinking about bringing in science and experimentation, but also, and I think also diversity. And so, but the thing is, right, is that we may say like the truth is what? What does the truth mean? I can't figure out what the truth means unless I am using a variety of sources, variety of perspectives and experiences, right? The same goes for justice. We all have various understandings what justice means it could look like. And justice might also change based on the time, right? Or the context or the circumstances. And so what I think Beloved does very well is bring up these situations where these different things mean different things. For instance, the idea of freedom itself, right? Are we free in terms of the folks who end up in this part of Ohio? Are they free now because they're now no longer in slavery? Or are they free now because they can do the things that a community like can do once it's liberated, like come together, solve problems, right? Because there are ways that will make that difficult, because if they're still living in fear of slavery, or then with the memory and the damage of slavery, right? So we're seeing this kind of thing play out constantly during the novel. And the same thing with justice. Our main character is not the only person who was a former slave that commits a horrible act. But when we get the sense of like the histories and the things that have afflicted these people, the harm enacted, right? Where Toni Morrison forces us to not say, oh, this is a bad person, because we can't, right? And then the question then becomes, well, what did we do with this person? What does this community do with this person? What does this person do in light of the thing they have done? Then we think about the community's jealousy and condemnation of baby Suggs for flaunting, for disobeying the anti-fugitive slave law, right? Is it understandable because they were not as fortunate as this house to have maybe their family together, or maybe to have a place where they could sit and that we have safe shelter and things like that? Like, how do we navigate that? This community of folks who are Black did something very horrible to this family, right? And increase their suffering. Then we think about how those things apply not just to this place or these characters, but to the nation. Thinking about healing the psychic and economic and social wounds that are results of slavery, white supremacy, colonization. This book, I think, in dealing with this community through this story, through this allegory, is making us think about these things, right? Which is why I think it's so valuable, because we are living in a constant world where this thing is still a part of us. We still carry the wounds. There's a quote by Frederick Douglass. I'm gonna find it, and I thought about it before this talk, but it's all right. I might say it later. I might say it later. So and one of my friends helped me. One of my friends helped me really tease out what was behind my willingness, or I say like inner my push to try to see like, oh, these philosophical aspects coming out of Morrison's work. I think they're there, but I don't think she would want me to do that to her work. I don't think Morrison wants us to think about the pragmatism or existentialism when we read her work necessarily. But my friend Crescent, who's professor at Haverford College, said that one of the reasons why Toni Morrison's work resonates with some in Western philosophy, sort of resonates, is because it's trying to get at some aspect of some core of what it means to be human, right? And so we see threads. That's exactly what's supposed to happen, right? Because we're exploring the underpinnings, the implications, the meaning of our human experience. And so that gave me a little bit of like relaxation. I was like, okay, it's not bad to do this, right? It's not bad to wonder and to sort of try to thread these gaps, or to thread these ideas that I think I see. So Toni Morrison's work, I think, is interesting as well, because I would say it's humanist, but at the same time, she does deal with a sort of traffic and some aspects, right, of what one might call hoodoo culture, hoodoo sort of like this aspect of, I don't know if we'll call it African American descendant. So from like things and sort of little traditions and little sort of ideas and superstitions that have been passed on in African American culture, and sort of more from sort of things that might have been held before slavery, right, that make their way into like these little things where you say, oh, if you sweep someone's feet, they have to spit on a broom because either they'll never get married or they'll go to prison, right? I remember sweeping my father's foot one time, and this happening. They may place mirrors in a certain kind of room so that spirits or some things avoid it, right? And so I don't think Morrison's work is really supernatural, but it wants to deal with mystery, right? Because it's the ways that people assign meaning affect how they look at the world and affect how they act, right? So these characters, when I think about Beloved, right? Beloved is not, to me, an actual person. Beloved is manifestation of grief. Beloved is the articulation of these things that cannot be said. And so that's what makes, I think, Morrison's work interesting, is because someone else could think Beloved really comes in forms, because it's that powerful, the grief, right? Those things, I think, are not actually opposites to me. They're not they're dealing with something that's similar, even if the articulation is different. So next, I kind of want to talk about Sula, which Sula is, I'm pretty sure Sula is the second novel that Morrison wrote. And what I find interesting about Sula is that this is actually around the time I'm also looking at ethical approaches, virtue versus, in terms of when you think about ethics from an existential sort of point of view. And so these different ways of what it means to be good, and how to be good in the world, and how to be oneself. And you have these two characters who are like complete opposites. One is the quintessential good person, Nell, and then you have Sula, who's like seen as this chaotic, disruptive force, and who's named as evil, or is treated as evil by the characters around her, the community. But again, what Morrison does so well is give the background and stories to these characters that explain why they come, quote unquote, incomplete. Every character in Sula is in some ways physical, uh, physically or emotionally, quote unquote, deformed from something that happened to them. So someone might be missing legs, someone from their experience in the war not able to operate, quote unquote, right? So there's all these people, and you have Nell who had this cleaving and erasure of her Creole heritage. Her family is from New Orleans. And we see that that's the very first chapters of the book is just focused on her childhood in how what her raising asked her to do about herself so that she could be seen as good and acceptable. And then we have the other side, we have Sula, right? And we see Sula's childhood, how Sula's childhood formed who she was in terms of these questions about loving and sexual freedom and how they informed who she would later become. Now, what becomes interesting about the both of them is that they developed this immense, amazing, close relationship where they would say that they would finish each other's sentences, right? So these two people that are opposites become so close and also complete each other. I would say that, this reminds me, again, tying some ideas and things to Ghana, of a Adinkra symbol, which is called, I'm not gonna butcher the tree, but it's called, the translation is, if you help me, I can help you. And so if you look, I don't know if it's large enough. I'm gonna make it a little larger. Okay. If you look, it's two bodies, right, that have corresponding shapes that are missing from the other, right? So what I think this says, right, is that I have things that you don't have, and you have things that I don't have. So if we work together, we can form something complete, something that's more than the sum of its parts, right? And that to me is the explanation between Sula's and Nell's relationship. Now, if you have any knowledge of what happens in the novel, sort of like plot wise, right? You'd be surprised at how I might be talking so well about the relationship because something very interesting happens in their relationship that threatens to break it and shifts it around. But despite those things that happen, it doesn't change the actual dynamic of their relationship, even as they've grown apart. So they are both needed and sort of need each other to kind of be their full selves, right? And we see how that without the other, they're both sort of challenged and suffer in some ways, right? And so one of the big things about the novel that engages in is this idea of self-becoming and how relationships can impede that, but they can also expand that, right? So how can you become oneself? And I think about why would I be so interested in this book that talks about relationship in such a way? Because like, ethical culture, right? If you bring out the best in the other to bring out the best in yourself, right? As I will always say, it suggests relationship. It suggests that we need to be intentional and think of our relationships as transformative. So in this book, we see relationships that are not transformative at all. And we see this one big transformative relationship. So some quotes that come from Sula. I'm me, I'm not their daughter. I'm not Nell, I'm me. Each time she said the word me, there was a gathering in her, like power, like joy, like fear. Another character says, all they want, man, is their own misery. Ask them to die for you, and they're yours for life. The two of them together this is talking of two characters. They were thinking about getting married, and they both had these different senses of that marriage would look like. But sort of, the character Jude, who's thinking this, and he's like looking at a person. The two of them together would make one Jude. Now, if I think about that line, I think about how many times as a young person, I thought receiving love from this person would make me the best version of myself that I could be. Forgetting, of course, what does that mean for the other person? They would complete me, but who would complete them, right? And then Sula is saying defiantly, I don't want to make someone else. I want to make myself. Our capacity and need for relationship doesn't guarantee success or longevity, but they offer truth. The truth is that no matter what happened to Nell or Sula, whether were talking or not, their bond was transformative for them. And without knowing the other, they would have been exponentially less than their full selves. So this again brings me to a beloved quote. She is a friend of my mind. She gathered me, man. The pieces I am, she gathered them and give them right back to me in all the right order. So I want to kind of come and sort of bring to conclusion by talking about the bluest eye, because the bluest eye, I think, was the one that started it all for the world. But for me, because someone I was very interested in as a partner, a potential partner, made this reference to one of the characters in the scene in The Bluest Eye. And I had a copy, or I knew a friend that had a copy, and I just was like, all right, I got to read it. And what struck me was the treatment of Charlie. And I don't know if people remember that I had done this performance piece that was based on poems I had written as a response to the idea of what would it be like if I became like this character. And so one of the ways this character is described as almost a musician without an instrument. One of the ways Sula is described as an artist without form, right? As these things are sort of suggesting that's very dangerous when someone cannot express or find ways to come to terms with the things that confuse them, that hurt them, that pain them, right? And this character, Charlie, is, I think Toni Morrison is probably what makes her, what started her career, what made her so amazing, was probably her treatment of this character in the very beginning. Because any other novel, any other thing that had like a sort of piece of work, it could have been very easy to dismiss this person as a universal, as this sort of blanket cloud of evil. He does this horrible act. He's a terrible father. He's a terrible husband, and bam, like that's it. He's evil. But we walk through his childhood and the things that happened to him, the fraught circumstances of his coming of age, and the ideas that he gets and receives about manhood, and the context of this horrific, terroristic environment. And then we see who he becomes. So I would say, in conclusion, that one of the sort of lessons that sort of like Charlie and Sula are that artists without form or musicians without instruments is a dangerous state of being in my mind, right? And so it tells me that it's our responsibility to be the healthiest realization of who we are, that we have to figure out what our form is. What are the ways that we deal with and work through the things that we experience? Because our undealt with pains and traumas will haunt us, and they'll show up in our relationships, and they'll show up in our communities. So if I don't want to be free like Charlie, I have to find my form. I have to find my instrument. It reminds me of a line from one of the lovely poets that came through in the ethical side. I think it was last summer, Tripita Mason, the former poet laureate of Philly. And she said, I learned to poem my pain. What are you going to do with yours? And this is not just a question for individuals, but for communities. The answers to some of these things posited, whether it's in Toni Morrison's novels or greater questions about ourselves, the answers exist in community. and because they're constantly emerging. So I don't want to argue that Morrison had all the answers to all our problems, historical or present, but she encouraged me to sit and feel through them. So I hope that we will live in a nation that seeks to follow her lead and explore these issues together. Thank you.